Let's talk about that nagging, frustrating pain in the back of your heel. Whether you're a seasoned runner or just trying to stay active, it can be a real roadblock. Today, we're going to dive into Achilles tendon pain, and we're going to look at it through a whole new lens. It's about load, not damage.
Achilles tendon pain is often described as damage or degeneration, and if you've seen the other videos on this channel, you'll know we take a slightly different evidence-based view. Now, why is that so important? Well, because understanding what's really going on can completely change your approach to getting better.
So, if you've dealt with Achilles pain, you've probably heard all the scary words, right? Words like tendinitis, degeneration, or microtears. All this language kind of paints this picture of a weak, damaged tendon that you have to protect at all costs. But what if that whole story isn't quite right?
This slide really lays out the big shift in thinking. For years, the story was tendinitis. The idea was that the tendon was inflamed and torn, so the obvious solution was rest and maybe some anti-inflammatory pills. But we know now that for most ongoing tendon issues, that's not the main problem. The modern view is tendinopathy, which frames it as an issue of load intolerance. Your tissue isn't necessarily damaged or weak, it's just gotten sensitive to the demands you're placing on it. And that right there changes the game. The solution isn't just to stop, it's to learn how to manage load and help the tendon adapt.
So what in the world is tendinopathy? Well, at its core, it's just persistent pain in a tendon that's related to how much work you're asking it to do. It's not about one single moment of injury. It's about how the cells inside your tendon are responding when they've been loaded more than they're currently used to. It's really just a loading problem.
And that idea of a loading problem brings us to the most important concept in this entire explainer, the balance between load and capacity. If you can get your head around this, you're halfway there.
I want you to think about it like this. Your tendon has a certain capacity. That's the amount of work it's prepared to handle right now. The load is all the stuff you do, walking, running, jumping. Pain is just a signal. It's your body's way of saying, hey, the load we're dealing with right now is a little bit more than our current capacity. It's not a big red alarm bell screaming, damage! Nope, it's just a heads up that the balance is a little off.
So how does this happen in real life? Well, the classic example is doing too much too soon. You know, deciding to double your running mileage overnight or playing a 3-hour game of tennis after a winter on the couch. But it's not always a big jump. Sometimes it's just not getting enough recovery between your workouts. And look, it's not just a problem for elite athletes. This can happen in runners, athletes, and also people who aren't training intensely.
All right, this next idea is one of the most powerful and honestly one of the most reassuring concepts in all of tendon rehab, especially if you've ever had an MRI or an ultrasound report that used those scary words we talked about. It's time to talk about the donut.
So check this out. Even in a tendon that has been painful for a long time and might show some changes on a scan, the vast majority of that tendon is still incredibly healthy, strong, and perfectly organized. Researchers came up with this brilliant analogy called the donut model. The part with some structural changes, that's just the hull, but it's surrounded by this big, thick, healthy donut of tissue that's ready to work. And this leads to the absolute guiding principle for getting better. Treat the donut, not the hole. What does that mean? It means we stop worrying and obsessing about the little hole that a scan might show. Instead, we focus all our energy on making the big, healthy donut part of the tendon even stronger and more capable. This is so important. What a scan shows often has very little to do with how you actually feel or what you can do. Scientists have found tons of people walking around with degeneration on their Achilles scans who have absolutely no pain. Your recovery is not written in stone by an image. It's all about improving the function and the load tolerance of all that good tissue you've already got. Okay, so we've reframed the problem. It's about load intolerance, not damage. And we know we have a whole lot of healthy donut to work with. So the big question is, how do we actually make it stronger? Well, that leads us to the path of adaptation. Now, this might be the biggest surprise of all. The best, most evidence-based approach for Achilles tendinopathy is not complete rest. Not at all. It's exercise. But not just any exercise. It's about a smart, progressive loading program that sends a signal to the tendon cells to start building a stronger, more resilient structure. You have to load it to make it adapt. So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, it's pretty simple in principle. First, you or a professional you're working with has to find a tolerable starting point, an exercise and a load that doesn't really stir things up. That exercise is the signal for adaptation. Then comes the most important part. You have to monitor how the tendon feels over the next 24 hours. If it feels okay, great. Then, over time, you just gradually, slowly turn up the dial. And here is a golden rule to guide you through that process. Tendons can be a little sneaky. They often feel fine while you're doing something, but they'll give you feedback the next morning. This simple rule is your best friend. If you are worse tomorrow, you've done too much. It's not a catastrophe, it's just feedback. It means you just need to dial it back a tiny bit next time and build up a little more slowly.
So, let's bring all this home. We've gone on a journey from a pretty scary story about damage and weakness to a much more empowering one about adaptation and control. It's time for a new view on what your Achilles pain is really telling you.
Let's just quickly recap the big ideas. First, Achilles pain is about load intolerance, not tissue damage. Second, our goal isn't just to make pain go away, it's to build the tendon's capacity. Third, the best way to do that is with progressive exercise. Fourth, remember the donut. You have a huge amount of healthy tissue to work with. And finally, recovery is an active process. It's about you loading and adapting, not just resting and waiting. I want to leave you with this final thought. We're all taught to think of pain as a stop sign, a big flashing red light that means danger, stop immediately. But what if that's not what's happening here? What if for your tendon, pain is actually more like a compass? What if it's not telling you to stop, but instead it's guiding you, pointing the way toward finding the right load to build a stronger, more resilient you? Thanks for joining us.